Amid the cold stone corridors of hell, Queen Elizabeth II, the radiant symbol of an empire's glory, now stands face to face with an unrelenting judgment. It sounds insane, doesn't it? How could a queen admired by the entire world, who once ruled with a glittering crown and unrivaled authority, be cast into such a place of darkness? That was the question that shook my heart when I read the letter from a man who had a fateful near-death experience. In that trance between life and death, he wandered into a surreal realm where he came face to face with Queen Elizabeth II herself. Not seated on a throne, but in the shadows of hell, she revealed the darkest secrets of the royal family, truths buried beneath the brilliance of the crown. But more terrifying than those secrets was something else. He returned with a prophecy from the Queen, a warning about the future of England, a future that could shake the foundation of history and reshape how we perceive the world. What were those secrets? Will the prophecy lead England into light or into darkness? Follow this story with an open heart, for it might change your belief in earthly glory and light, also a fire within you to seek eternal truth. My name is Oliver Collins. I'm 56 years old and live alone in Portland, Oregon. To the outside world, I appear to be just another ordinary middle-aged man with a mundane accounting job, a repetitive routine, and nothing particularly remarkable to speak of. But beneath that ordinary exterior lies a secret I've hidden for most of my life. I was strangely obsessed with Queen Elizabeth II. My apartment resembled a miniature shrine dedicated to her. Every book, every photo capturing her historic moments was carefully preserved. On the living room wall hung a large portrait of the Queen in her coronation regalia. Every morning I would gaze up at her as if seeking direction for the day ahead. To me, she was the embodiment of order, of steadfastness, the only light cutting through the grey monotony of my uninspired existence. I wasn't always like this. The obsession began when I was a college student, right at the time my family fell apart. My parents divorced, my siblings scattered, and I felt as though the whole world had collapsed beneath my feet. In the midst of that chaos, I stumbled upon a document about Queen Elizabeth II's reign. Her sense of stability, her composure, and her regal dignity gave me a feeling of safety I desperately craved. I began collecting everything related to her, as if understanding her life could help me regain a sense of anchor. However, I never shared this obsession openly. My friends thought I merely had a passing interest in British history. I let them believe that. But deep down, she was far more than a historical figure to me. She was almost saint-like, a symbol of purity, something I could worship to avoid confronting the emptiness in my soul. I had once been a devout Catholic. I grew up with prayers, Sunday masses, and the belief in a loving Almighty God. But over time, God faded into a distant memory. Church services were replaced with hours poring over royal biographies. Prayer gave way to reflections on her speeches. Faith was supplanted by admiration, which, in truth, was blind idolatry. I told myself, as long as I live by the values she represented, order, discipline, royal composure, my life will be fine. But my soul knew the truth. I was deceiving myself. I share this not to stir up controversy or to tarnish an international icon. I do not write this to offend those who have admired her. I was once among them. But what I am about to tell you is no longer a matter of feelings or opinions. It is an experience, a near-death experience that opened my eyes to a spiritual reality far more terrifying and truthful than anything untrue. I saw what no one ever wants to see, hell, not just fire, but a mirror for the soul, a throne manipulated by darkness. I heard the voice of the one I had long forgotten, Jesus Christ, call my name, show me mercy, and assign me a mission, to warn those still blind before the time of grace runs out. If you are still reading, perhaps this is no coincidence. Maybe you are also carrying something you cannot yet name, a sense of emptiness, a feeling of distance from God, or perhaps an image in your heart that has taken the place only He deserves. Don't turn away too quickly. Don't dismiss this as madness, because truth, even when painful, is the only doorway that can lead us out of the dark. If something in this story made you pause and reflect, leave a comment that says, "I'm reflecting on something." We cannot promise answers to every question, but we do have a faith community ready to pray for you. God never turns away a soul seeking His light. He only grieves when we ignore his warning. The Eternal Bible Stories channel invites you to walk with us on this journey of faith. Click subscribe and leave your name and city. We will lift you up in prayer so that you know you are not alone. And if this story touched you, consider clicking the super thanks button, the heart icon below the video. Every gift is a candle, helping us light the path for thousands of others searching for hope. Now let us continue with Oliver's letter about what happened on that fateful day, the day a royal artifact brought him to the edge between NDE and death. That evening the rain fell endlessly, the sound of water tapping steadily on the roof like a weary melody. I sat in the corner of my small dining room, the dim light from the hanging lamp shining down on a royal teacup bearing the Queen's crest, an exquisite antique I had just purchased from a little shop on the old street. I had searched for it for many months, and now, holding it in my hands, I felt a strange kind of joy, as if this object was more than just porcelain. It carried a mysterious allure, something almost supernatural. I stood up, wanting to bring the cup to my bedroom, the place where I often sat alone at night, immersed in nameless thoughts. The wooden stairs leading to the second floor creaked under each step, the cracks in the boards telling the silent story of an old house weathered by time. I cradled the cup with care, my fingers gliding gently over the golden rim, my heart racing with excitement. In my mind, I imagined myself stepping into a royal tea party, all eyes filled with admiration turning toward me. I began to whistle a vague melody, one I didn't immediately recognize, but it echoed like a song of praise to the greatness I had always longed to touch. Then, in a single careless moment, my foot slipped on a damp stair, slick from rainwater seeping through the window frame. Time seemed to freeze. I saw the teacup slide from my grip, suspended in midair, the gold crest catching the light one final time before it struck the floor and shattered into hundreds of fragments, like fallen stardust with nowhere to belong. My body lost balance, stumbled, and then a sharp pain sliced through my head as I tumbled forward, my forehead slamming against the cold, hard edge of the stair. A loud crash rang out, whether from bone or wood, I couldn't tell, and everything dissolved into darkness. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but when a flicker of awareness returned, I heard the piercing wail of an ambulance siren, mingled with the panicked voice of a stranger. "He's lost a lot of blood. Hurry." Red and blue lights flashed through my closed eyelids, and I felt my body being lifted, laid onto a stretcher that felt icy against my back. But the strange thing was, I didn't feel pain. I didn't feel anything except a peculiar sense of release, as if my soul were drifting out of my body, hovering in an undefined space somewhere between heaven and earth. At the hospital, the doctors later told me I had suffered a severe traumatic brain injury, with a skull fracture and life-threatening internal bleeding. They said my heart nearly stopped twice on the way to the emergency room, and no one believed I would make it. But in that fragile moment between life and death, I wasn't in the hospital. I was somewhere else, a hazy realm where reality melted like wax under flame. The sound of medical equipment faded into the distance, replaced by a strange noise like wind whistling through ancient stone corridors, carrying with it the breath of judgment. Lying there, blood flowing from my wound, I faced a brutal truth. My life, everything I had chased after, was nothing more than a sequence of illusions. I had lived to worship a distant image, but now, with death looming close, that image did not come to save me. A vague Bible verse from my childhood came to mind, something I had once heard in church. "What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul?" Those words, which I had once dismissed as fairy tale sentiment, now echoed in my mind with the sharpness of a blade. What had I exchanged for those fleeting moments of excitement over teacups and royal fantasies? But the darkness did not devour me completely. Instead, it opened an invisible door. I felt my soul being pulled away, not upward to heaven, nor downward into the earth, but into a kingdom of whispers and shadowy silhouettes. A voice, origin unknown, rang out in my mind. "You lived for vanity, but vanity does not lead you to the light." I shuddered, unsure whether it was the voice of God, the devil, or simply the echo of my own conscience. As the dim light from the operating room pierced faintly through my eyelids, I heard a doctor whisper, "We're losing him." But I wasn't afraid. Instead, a burning question rose within me. Would I find a way through this darkness, or would I remain forever trapped in the shattered pieces of myself, like the broken teacup on the floor? Darkness engulfed me, cold and suffocating, as if I was sinking to the bottom of a lightless ocean. My consciousness floated freely, no longer tethered to my body, no longer disturbed by the sounds of the hospital or the sirens of the ambulance. But instead of peace, a growing sense of dread rose within me, as though I were being pulled into a place not meant for the living. Then, from within the darkness, a scene slowly emerged, twisted and terrifying, like a painting charred by fire, leaving behind only grotesque outlines. In front of me stood Buckingham Palace, but not the grand palace seen in books or films. Its stone walls were grey and cracked, as if shattered by sledgehammers, covered in lush, damp moss that released the scent of decayed earth mixed with tired decays. The towering windows, once glimmering under sunlight, were now pitch black, like the eyes of a lurking beast. Royal portraits lined an endless hallway, but they were no longer still. Every face, from ancient kings to elegant princesses, had turned to watch me, their eyes glowing like embers, tracking each of my steps. They said nothing, yet their gaze pierced into my soul, heavy with silent reproach. I walked forward, my legs trembling on the icy stone floor, each step echoing with a strange resonance, as if the palace itself was responding in its own cryptic language. The air was thick and heavy, reeking of rotting wood and old fabric, mingled with something sharper, the scent of despair. Somewhere in the darkness, the barking of invisible corgis broke the silence. Unlike the cheerful images seen in royal photographs, these barks were snarling and shrill, like predators on the hunt. The barking mingled with the whispers of lost souls, voices with no clear source, endlessly muttering curses in a language I couldn't understand, but which sent my heart pounding erratically. The corridor seemed to stretch forever, winding through impossible turns. Weak torches clung to the walls, flickering with pale green flames, casting dancing shadows that revealed disturbing details. A painting of Queen Victoria torn and bleeding red from the eyes, a golden crown resting on a stone pedestal that, as I approached, transformed into a heap of rusted thorns, glinting as if mocking me. I wanted to run, but my legs felt held back by an invisible force, compelling me to face the truth. This was not a palace of glory, but hell, a twisted ruin of former splendor, where everything reflected regret and collapse. I stopped in front of a massive wooden door, carved with intricate patterns that had been warped by time and fire. From the cracks of the door, a cold draft wafted out, carrying the scent of smoke and ash. I hesitated, my heart pounding, but then a strange sound like the clink of porcelain against a saucer came from within, pulling me closer. I pushed the door open, and it creaked with a piercing groan, revealing a scene one could never forget. Inside was a bizarre tea room, but there was nothing elegant about it. A long wooden table tilted dangerously, as if about to collapse, covered in cobwebs and layers of dust. The chairs around it were misshapen, some with broken legs, others charred as if half consumed by fire. On the table, dozens of shattered porcelain teacups lay scattered, some still emitting black smoke, as if they held the souls of curses. A lone scone sat on a silver plate, but when I looked closely, it wasn't a pastry at all. It was a lump of grey ash, cracked like parched earth. I stood frozen, my breath caught in my throat. This tea room wasn't a place of rest, but a trap, a grim reminder of the vanity once exalted. I wanted to turn and flee, but the eyes from the portraits on the wall now present in the room like ghostly figures held me in place. A voice, invisible, low and chilling, echoed through the air. You've arrived, but are you willing to face what awaits? I shuddered, feeling as if my soul was being stripped bare before an unseen judgment. This was hell. I knew it with certainty, not the hell of fire and brimstone described in the Bible, but a hell of broken dreams, of illusions built from pride and blindness. Every step I took inside this palace was a step deeper into a truth I was not yet ready to face. But I had no choice. The door behind me had vanished, and this strange tea room was the only path forward, either into deeper darkness or perhaps toward a light I had never dared to hope for. The wooden door shut behind me with a screech like claws scraping against stone. Before me stretched a distorted tea room, where the crimson light of dripping candles on the ceiling fell like melting wax, coating the scorched stone walls in a sickly sheen. The pungent stench of sulfur mixed with the rancid scent of rotting tea, clinging to every breath I took. At the center stood a long, warped tea table, as if squeezed by an invisible hand. Its surface was layered in dust and delicate cobwebs that shimmered like silver threads under candlelight. Porcelain teacups lay scattered across it, some cracked, others leaking thick black liquid that steamed and swirled like the imprisoned breath of cursed souls. Silver plates were scattered around the table, not holding scones, but grey lumps of ash, cracked like parched earth, as if every flavor of life had been burned away. At the head of the table, on a red velvet armchair now torn and exposing rusted springs, sat Queen Elizabeth II. Her pale blue silk dress was faded and tattered at the hem, as if gnawed by time and the fire of hell. The crown on her head, once gleaming with jewels, was now misshapen. A single red gem remained, flickering like a watching eye. Her face was gaunt, cheeks sunken, the once deep blue of her eyes now cloudy and dull, reflecting the torment of a soul long imprisoned. Yet her posture remained upright. Her thin hands rested on the arms of the chair, still exuding an undeniable regality, as if hell had worn her down but not destroyed her entirely. In the dense shadows beyond the reach of candlelight, the ghostly figures of former British monarchs hovered. Henry VIII, broad and red-faced, muttered curses in a voice as deep as thunder. Queen Victoria stood still in her long black dress, her eyes cold as stone, staring through space with a gaze that pierced reality. Other faint figures whispered in an ancient tongue, sharp as blades, forming a chorus of bitterness and blame. But Queen Elizabeth paid them no attention. Her eyes were locked onto mine, as though the entirety of hell was nothing more than a backdrop for the moment that was about to unfold. She raised her hand, a thin, bony finger pointing toward a cracked teapot on the table. Black smoke seeped from its spout like the breath of a beast. "Oliver Collins," she said, her voice low and echoing across the stone walls. "Brew me a cup of tea, the exact flavor I desire. You worship me, so you must know how to please a queen, don't you?" I stood frozen, breath caught, my hand trembling slightly as her gaze pierced through me. On the table, a single white porcelain teacup intact and untouched quivered gently, as if waiting. I stepped closer, each footfall heavy against the cold stone floor, the candles above seeming to drip blood onto my shoulders. My hand touched the teapot, its porcelain was scalding, though no flames surrounded it, and as I lifted it, a plume of black smoke burst forth, carrying the whispers of ghostly monarchs. "He will fail. He is unworthy." I poured the liquid into the cup, but what streamed out was not tea, it was a thick, black substance that reeked like burning tar. I tried to stir it, but the silver spoon in my hand bent, twisted by an unseen force. Henry VIII let out a guttural laugh, his voice rumbling like thunder. "You think you understand her? You're just a fool chasing fantasies." I bit my lip, trying to stay composed, but the liquid in the cup began to boil, splashing wildly. One drop struck my hand, searing it like fire. The Queen tilted her head, her eyes never leaving mine, and the lone red gem on her crown flashed, as if rendering judgment. "This is wrong," she said, her tone icy. "My tea must be pure like the loyalty I once demanded from my subjects. But you, Oliver, you brewed it blindly, with your own pride." She pointed to the cup, and the black liquid transformed into a twisted face, my face, haunted and distorted, sneering back at me. I dropped the teapot. It crashed against the table and shattered, black smoke erupting like a wave. The ghostly figures shrieked, their cries shaking the room, but the Queen remained motionless. "You idolized me," she continued, her voice sharp as a blade, "but do you understand the cost of a crown?" My breath grew heavy, my head spinning at her words. The Queen whom I once saw as the symbol of perfection was now sitting in the darkest corner of hell, unveiling a truth I had never dared to face. I stammered, my voice hoarse. "Your Majesty, why are you here? You were glorious. You were light." She smiled, but it was a smile soaked in regret, like a wound that never healed. "Oliver," she said, her voice dropping low, almost to a whisper. I once believed the crown was everything: power, duty, the respect of the world. I led an empire, stood firm through wars, but I let ceremony and responsibility pull me away from God. I thought fame could fill the emptiness in my soul, but I was wrong. It was on vanity, and now I pay the price in this darkness. Her words, like a cold wind, stirred the hidden corners of my mind. I bowed my head, my fingernails digging into my palms, the weight on my chest like a stone. She wasn't divine, just human, deeply flawed. And I had wasted years worshipping a mirage. Then what must I do? I asked, searching her eyes for some sign, some direction. She leaned forward, the crown tilting slightly, the red gem flashing as if it wished to swallow the candlelight. "It's never too late," she said, her voice gentle but resolute, like a prayer. "Let go of what you've worshipped in place of God. Seek the true light, Oliver, before this darkness drags you down just as it dragged me." The room shook. The remaining teacups exploded, porcelain shards flying in every direction. Black smoke surged like a storm. The ghostly monarchs howled, their cries ripping through the air. But the Queen remained seated, her eyes holding a faint glimmer of hope, as if she were offering me the chance she no longer had. A small door appeared in the corner of the room, low, narrow, and cloaked in shadow. Black smoke curled through its cracks like a dangerous invitation. I stepped toward the door, each footfall heavy, my hand brushing the cold frame. The Queen's words echoed in my mind: "Seek the true light before the darkness pulls you under." And then, a quiet question rose within me. Would I be able to make it through this darkness, or would I remain trapped like her in the strange, cursed tea room of hell? The stone floor beneath my feet began to tremble, groaning as if the earth itself were awakening. In front of me, a small stone table emerged from the darkness, its surface etched with swirling patterns, carved so deep they seemed to spiral into an invisible abyss. On the table sat a single item, the cursed teacup, the same white porcelain cup I had once purchased, rimmed with gold, its crest of Queen Elizabeth II now dulled and eroded as if eaten away by time. But it was no longer an inanimate object. It quivered slightly, as if it had a heartbeat of its own, and the thick black liquid inside steamed upward, curling like a venomous serpent. A low, icy voice echoed from every direction, as if the darkness itself were whispering, "Drink it, Oliver. Only truth can guide you through the darkness." The porcelain burned like it had been forged in fire, forcing me to bite my lip to withstand the pain. Black smoke swirled from the cup, forming twisted shapes: a shattered crown, a pleading face, then vanished. I hesitated, eyes scanning the dark, but there was no other way out. I lifted the cup, its black liquid, as heavy as molten lead, and raised it to my lips. The first drop touched my tongue, and a sharp pain shot through my head, as if something were tearing my mind apart. My vision blurred, and the space around me shifted. I was no longer standing before the stone table, I was inside the grand room of Buckingham Palace. But it wasn't the distorted palace of hell. This was a memory, vivid, terrifying in its clarity. Queen Elizabeth II, dressed in a soft blue silk gown, sat at a conference table surrounded by royal advisors, their faces tense. A man held a stack of documents in his hand and whispered, "Princess Diana is causing trouble with the press, Your Majesty. We must control the narrative." The Queen nodded, her gaze cold. "Do whatever must be done for the good of the crown." I saw Diana standing in the corner of the room, her eyes filled with pain, pleading, "Let me tell the truth." But the Queen turned away, her voice firm. The monarchy must be protected. The scene dissolved, and I saw her alone in a small chapel, kneeling before the altar, lips moving in silent prayer. But then a bell rang, signaling another meeting. She rose, her face hardening, as if her faith had been strangled by royal obligation. The scene shifted, and I shuddered as I realized the next vision wasn't of the Queen but of myself. I saw myself in a small room under dim yellow light, sitting alone with a book about the royal family. A friend, whose face was now faded in my memory, knocked on the door and invited me to dinner, but I waved them off. "I'm busy," I said. I watched myself scoff at a co-worker who spoke about a church service. my voice laced with sarcasm. God doesn't help anyone. Just read about the Queen. That's enough. Moments of loneliness played out. One after another, I sat for hours staring at a photograph of the Queen, my eyes vacant, as if searching for something I didn't even understand. The teacup in my hand burned fiercely, the black liquid inside boiling and splattering onto my skin, leaving red blisters. An invisible voice laughed sharply, the sound as piercing as shattering glass. Look, Oliver, you and she are the same slaves to pride, worshippers of vanity. I dropped the cup. It shattered on the stone floor, fragments scattering in every direction, each one reflecting a memory. The Queen giving an order, me turning away from friends, both of us rejecting what truly mattered. Black smoke billowed from the broken cup, forming a distorted face, half the Queen's, half mine, its eyes mocking, as if rendering judgment. The space trembled. The stone table split in two, and I staggered back, breath heaving, fingernails digging into my palms. The memories clung to me, sharp as blades embedded deep in my mind. I saw the truth clearly. I had placed the Queen on an altar, not because of her, but because I needed something to fill the emptiness in my soul. And she, in her pride, had done the same, placing the monarchy above faith. This palace, filled with painful memories, was not just her hell, it was a mirror of my own failures. A new door appeared in the darkness, narrow and low, with black smoke seeping through its edges like a silent summons. I stepped toward it, my hand brushing against the cold stone frame, my heart heavy with the truth that had just been revealed. A quiet question echoed through my mind. If even the Queen could fall, could I find a way out of this darkness, or would I forever remain imprisoned by the memories of my own making? The space around me cracked like shattered glass. Jagged fractures split across the sky of nothingness, and fragments of reality disintegrated, falling and evaporating like scorched stardust. I no longer felt weight, only the pull of an invisible force drawing me downward through endless layers of darkness, as if my soul were being dragged to the deepest end of itself. When the motion stopped, I found myself standing on a black stone floor, polished like a mirror, so cold it numbed my skin. It reflected a dim and shapeless light coming from floating, aimless flames high above. There were no walls, no ceiling, only a circular, infinite room surrounded by towering mirrors, each one as tall as a mountain wall, edged with silver blades sharp as knives. And the most terrifying part, they didn't reflect me. They reflected different versions of me. Each image distorted, warped by ambition, loneliness, and a flickering light in the eyes, a sweet, seductive kind of pride that was destroyed. At the center of the room, upon a black stone pedestal carved with tangled patterns like fossilized veins, sat a perfect replica of me. But not entirely. It had the same messy hair, the same hunched shoulders worn by time, but its eyes were not mine. They were the eyes of someone whose soul had long since died, burning slowly like embers. In its hands was a copy of the cursed teacup. The black liquid inside bubbled and frothed, steaming like a soul being burned alive. It spoke. The voice was mine, but cold, emotionless, like metal striking stone. "Look at yourself, Oliver," it hissed, its gaze stabbing into my heart like a blade. "A man who lives for lifeless objects. A man who believes that knowing a queen is enough to understand greatness. How pitiful you are." I instinctively stepped back, but the mirrors around me began to tremble and hiss. One by one, they lit up, like screens broadcasting memories. Each slice of my life played out in vivid detail, as if my soul were being stripped bare. I saw myself on a rainy afternoon, sitting in a cramped living room, turning down an invitation to church. "I have more important things to do," I said, flipping through a book on the British monarchy, my eyes filled with awe. Another scene appeared. One was sitting alone at night, clutching a portrait of the Queen, as if holding on to a deity. The warm yellow light cast over my emotionless face, and for a brief moment I looked like I was praying, but not to God. Then I saw myself falling down the stairs again, blood flowing, my head striking the wooden edge, the teacup shattered beside me. Yet even in that moment my gaze never left the porcelain shards. It wasn't my body that mattered. It was the object I had worshipped. You chose her instead of God, the ghost continued, lifting the teacup. The liquid inside boiled and spilled over, turning into smoke that formed a distorted version of my face, grinning wickedly. You chose the darkness, Oliver. No one pushed you. You walked into it willingly, chasing the false light you created. It stepped toward me. Each of its steps struck the stone floor with a cracking sound, and web-like fractures spread outward, as though the entire room was breaking under the weight of undeniable truth. Then it pointed to the largest mirror, the one showing the final moment of the accident. I saw myself lying motionless, blood pooling on the floor, but still whispering, "Queen." As if she could save me. "Do you see?" The ghost growled, its eyes blazing. "That is you. A man who worships an image, a soul adrift, placing his hope in ashes. You did not call out to God. You did not seek life. You called upon the name of someone already dead." I couldn't take it anymore. I collapsed, head bowed low, hot tears streaming down my face. I clenched my fists until they bled, trying to keep myself from breaking entirely. My chest felt crushed between two stones, one of truth, one of regret. And I whispered, not as a defense, but as a confession. "I was wrong, Lord, I was wrong. I was blind. I turned my back on you to chase vanity. Please save me from myself." As soon as the words left my lips, the room seemed to explode. A violent tremor surged through the space, and the mirrors shattered into thousands of fragments, scattering like pieces of light broken off from heaven. The ghost let out a scream, a mind-ripping shriek, as if its soul were being burned from the inside out. The teacup in its hand cracked and dissolved, the black liquid evaporating into nothing, and then it vanished in a cloud of dust, leaving behind only silence. Amid the wreckage, from the center of the room, a gentle light flickered. It wasn't blinding or majestic, but small, like a single ray of sunlight slipping through a crack in the stone. Yet it was enough to illuminate a narrow passage carved deep into the distant wall. I wiped my tears and rose to my feet. My steps still trembled, but something inside me had shifted. It was no longer the artificial glow of crowns or relics. It was the light of a chance, an invitation, a fragile hope. I approached the edge of the passage and placed my hand on the cold wall. From deep within, a quiet question echoed. I had faced the ghost of myself. But would I have the strength to keep walking forward, or was the darkness still waiting for me to fall one more time? A thunderous roar echoed like ocean waves crashing against a cliff, tearing me from the dim beam of light. I opened my eyes, gasping for breath, and found myself standing in the middle of a colossal stone arena. Towering walls stretched upward into endless darkness. Blazing red light from high-mounted torches cast streaks of broken illumination onto the black stone floor, which was etched with ancient symbols like curses carved in blood. All around me, hundreds of faceless, ghostly figures sat silently on the stone tiers, their hollow eyes fixed on me, forming a silent chorus of judgment. The acrid scent of sulfur blended with charred wood, clinging to the air and burning my throat. This was no glorious palace. It was a courtroom of hell, where every gaze carried the weight of truth that could not be escaped. At the center of the arena stood a raised platform, carved from obsidian, gleaming like glass but reflecting warped images, a shattered crown, a broken sword, a face weeping in anguish. On the judge's bench sat 3 royal souls, each emanating an aura of terrifying authority, as if time itself had failed to erase the sins they bore. Charles I, with a silver beard and piercing gaze, wore a crimson robe. His hand clutched an ancient scroll, as though rereading his own death sentence. Mary, Queen of Scots, draped in a long black dress with a high collar that concealed the scar from the executioner's blade, had deep blue eyes that glistened with sorrow and vengeance. Henry VIII loomed, massive and red-faced, clad in torn fur. His fingers bore glittering gold rings, yet every jewel was cracked, as if echoing the broken marriages and oaths of his reign. They sat not as monarchs but as divine judges, their penetrating stares peeling back the layers of my soul. At the center of the courtroom, on a low stone pedestal, stood Queen Elizabeth II. Her wrists were shackled with iron chains, each link etched with ancient letters that glimmered with a sickly glow. Her silk blue gown hung in tatters, and her crown sat crooked on her head, the single remaining red gem flashing like a drop of blood. Her face was weathered, her eyes cloudy, yet she held herself with unbroken dignity, as if daring hell itself to challenge her. I stood not far away, my feet rooted to the stone floor, breath heavy, fingernails digging into my palms as the eyes of the royal spirits turned toward me. Elizabeth, Charles I spoke, his voice deep like thunder, echoing through the stone walls and making the torches flicker. You allowed pride to lead you, placing the monarchy above the soul. You manipulated your subjects, suffocated the truth about Diana, ignored her pleas, all in the name of royal interest. He raised the scroll, and it burst into flames, the black smoke forming the image of Diana. Her eyes were full of pain as she stood in a palace corridor, whispering, "Let me speak." But the image vanished when Charles waved his hand, and the flame died out. Mary, Queen of Scots, leaned forward, her red hair beneath a silk cap glinting like fresh blood. "I lost my head for the crown," she said, her voice sharp as the blade that once touched her neck. "And you, Elizabeth, you lost your soul to pride. You believed you had the right to control everything, the fate of your people, your family, even your own faith. You turned the palace into a temple of self-worship." She lifted her hand, and an invisible mirror appeared before the Queen, reflecting her kneeling in the chapel, only sparsenbund by a knock at the door. Her expression hardened, and she turned her back on the altar. Henry VIII rose, his massive frame shaking the stone bench, and a guttural laugh escaped his throat, more like the growl of a hunting dog. "You are no different from me, Elizabeth," he roared, pointing at her with a ring-laden finger, the gold gleaming. "I destroyed the church for lust. You destroyed your soul for reputation. You let pride blind you to truth. You let your advisors' whispers drown out the voice of God." He slammed his fist on the bench, and a cloud of black smoke erupted, forming an image of the Queen signing a document, her face cold and unmoved, while the distant cries of Diana echoed, drowned beneath the cheers of the royal court. Then, like a turning blade, all three royal souls turned toward me. Their eyes, like flames, burned through every wall in my mind. "Oliver Collins," Mary said, her voice soft but sharp, like a silk-wrapped dagger. "You are complicit. You idolized Elizabeth, blind to the truth. You worshipped an illusion." Charles continued, holding up the half-burned scroll. "You placed her on an altar, ignored God, ignored those around you, all to chase after vanity." Henry VIII let out a booming laugh that extinguished the torches, plunging the chamber into darkness. "You worship the crown just like us. Do you dare defend her now?" I opened my mouth, my voice dry and hoarse, struggling to form words of defense. "I only admired her," I said, my eyes flicking toward the Queen, but she did not look at me. Her cloudy eyes remained fixed on the stone floor. "I only wanted to honor a great symbol," but my words were weak, like a candle in a storm. Charles scoffed, his voice tolling like a death bell. "Admire? You made her a deity, but she was only human, flawed, like you." Mary lifted her hand, and the mirror before the Queen turned to face me. It reflected my own face, eyes hollow, arms wrapped around a portrait of the Queen, while church bells rang outside the window, bells I had ignored. I lowered my head. Tears streamed down my face, warm and heavy, falling onto the stone floor, forming tiny streaks of light that quickly vanished. The truth pierced through my mind like a blade. I was no different from the Queen. We were both bound by pride. We both placed vain things, crowns, reputation above God. I could not defend her, because doing so meant defending my own blindness. "I cannot," I whispered, my voice breaking, my vision blurring. I was wrong. We were both wrong. The courtroom shook violently, as if my confession had cracked the foundations of hell. The royal souls laughed, a bone-chilling sound, like shattering glass mixed with howling winds. Charles I raised his hand, and the scroll turned to ash. Black smoke burst forth, shaping into the image of a shattered cross. Mary, Queen of Scots, stood, her black dress billowing like the wings of a death bird, her eyes glinting with a flicker of regret. Henry VIII slammed his hand one final time, and the stone platform split in two. Black smoke surged upward, swallowing Queen Elizabeth II, leaving only her chains clattering to the floor with a dry, hollow clang. The ground beneath my feet collapsed, and I fell into darkness, my body suspended in an endless void of cold silence. The laughter of the royal souls still echoed, but now it was mingled with something else, a faint whisper, like a prayer left unfinished. My heart weighed heavy with truth. The Queen and the First had both been led by pride, but was this confession enough to lead me into the light, or would this darkness remain my eternal home? A narrow path appeared in the void, a dim light at the far end, like a dangerous invitation. I took a deep breath, my hand trembling as it touched the edge of the stone, and stepped forward carrying a question that still had no answer. The rustling of thousands of pages echoed like wind blowing through a dead forest, pulling me out of the endless darkness. I opened my eyes, breathing heavily, and found myself standing in the middle of a colossal library. Towering bookshelves stretched up to a hazy vaulted ceiling, where a ghostly blue light dripped down from floating lamps, wireless, sourceless. The shelves, carved from glossy black wood, curved like the spine of some ancient beast. They were packed with thick, mottled leather-bound books, each etched with names in glowing golden letters. But the light from the lettering felt cold, as though it rose from the depths of a grave. The air was heavy with the stench of decayed ink and ancient dust, clinging to my throat and making every breath painful. The stone floor beneath my feet was engraved with spiraling patterns, like rivers leading into an abyss. Every step I took echoed, as if this library was listening. At the center of the library, on a grey stone pedestal, lay a massive open book. Its leather cover was deeply engraved with the words, Elizabeth II Regina. The golden letters shimmered, but as I approached, they trembled slightly, as if whispering long-buried secrets. I stopped. My hand trembled, nails digging into my palms, as the first page turned by itself with a tearing sound like flesh being ripped. An image appeared so vivid it felt like I was standing within it. Queen Elizabeth II, seated in a closed meeting room in Buckingham Palace, her gaze cold and detached. In front of her, royal advisors holding a stack of documents whispered, "Princess Diana is damaging the monarchy's image. We must control the media." The Queen nodded, her voice firm, "Hide the truth, for the sake of the crown." A faint figure, Diana, stood in the corner, her eyes filled with pain, her lips barely moving. "Let me speak." But the Queen turned her back, signed a document, and Diana's cry was drowned out by the rustling of paper. The page turned again, and I saw the Queen alone in a small chapel, kneeling before the altar, her hands clasped, lips moving in prayer. But her eyes wavered, drawn away by invisible whispers, the voices of advisors, of her subjects, of royal duty. A counselor knocked at the door, voice urgent, "Your Majesty, a decision must be made." She stood, her grey silk gown catching the dim light. Her eyes hardened. She turned her back on the altar, leaving her prayer unfinished. The page quivered, and the golden letters dissolved into smoke, forming a single floating phrase. Pride led her into the darkness. I stepped back, my breath heavy, but the book did not stop. A new page turned, and this time the name engraved on the cover was Oliver Collins. My heart clenched, as if an invisible hand had seized it. An image appeared, painfully vivid. I was in a small room, under dim yellow light, sitting alone with a book about the royal family. A friend, whose face was now faded in memory, stood at the door and invited me to dinner. "You need to get out, Oliver." I waved him off, my voice laced with sarcasm. "I have more important things to do." The scene shifted, and I saw myself mocking a co-worker who spoke about a church service. My voice was sharp. "God won't help you. All you need is the Queen." A final image emerged. I was clutching the cursed teacup, its golden rim gleaming, my eyes hollow, as if I were praying to a lifeless treasure. The pages of the book flipped faster. Black smoke surged upward, forming a distorted face, my own wearing a mocking grin. A raspy chuckle echoed through the library, and I turned, heart pounding. A hellish librarian emerged from the darkness, its body twisted, as if molded from smoke and bone. Its face was formless, except for two glowing eye sockets like embers and a jagged toothed smile as sharp as blades. It wore a tattered black cloak, In one bony hand it held a quill, the tip dripping black ink like blood. "Oliver Collins," it said, its voice low and gravelly, like stone grinding against stone. "You and Elizabeth are the same. Pride brought you here to the archive of lost souls. Stay with these records, and you will understand everything, all sins, all mistakes, every moment you turn from the light." I shook my head, sweat dripping from my brow, my hands clenched until they hurt. "No," I said, my voice hoarse, my eyes locked on the book, where the black smoke continued to writhe. "I don't want to stay here. I've seen enough." The librarian tilted its head. Its smile widened, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. "Seen enough?" It sneered. "You've seen nothing. This record is your truth, a man who worshipped trinkets, mocked faith, and let pride lead him into darkness." It raised its hand, and the book shuddered. The pages flipped rapidly, and black smoke formed another image, me falling down the stairs. The teacup shattered, blood spilling, yet my eyes remained fixed on the broken porcelain, as if it were everything. I bowed my head, tears streaming down, hot against my cheeks, falling to the stone floor and forming tiny trails of light that quickly vanished. The truth pierced my mind like a blade. I had allowed pride to dim the light, just like the Queen, just like every soul trapped in this library. But I did not want to sink any deeper. I looked up, vision blurred, and whispered, like a prayer, "Lord, please lead me out of this darkness. Forgive my blindness." The moment the words left my lips, the book burst into flames. Crimson fire devoured the pages, and the black smoke dissolved. The librarian let out a scream, a sound like shattering glass, its body crumbling into dust. The library shook violently, bookshelves collapsed, and other books caught fire. The eerie blue light from the floating lamps flickered and died. The stone floor split open, and I fell once more into darkness, my body suspended in a cold, weightless void. The sound of pages rustling still echoed faintly, but now it was joined by another sound, a gentle whisper, like a voice offering comfort from afar. My heart remained heavy with truth, but the prayer I had spoken carried with it a fragile glimmer of hope. A narrow path appeared in the darkness, with a faint light glowing at the far end, like a promise of redemption. I took a deep breath, my hand trembling as it reached for the edge of the stone, and I stepped forward. A chilling wind swept through, carrying with it whispers like the signs of lost souls. I felt my body drifting, then suddenly grounding, my legs trembling as they landed on an endless stone corridor. Silver mist blanketed the space, thick and shimmering like shards of broken glass suspended in the air. The stained stone walls were covered in black moss, etched with faded patterns that resembled forgotten stories. Dim light flickered from torches floating high above, casting warped shadows along the floor. The air was thick with the scent of damp decay, mixed with the faint aroma of wilted flowers, making my throat ache with every breath. Each of my steps echoed loudly, as if this corridor had been waiting for me for a very long time. At the far end of the hallway, a faint figure emerged, sculpted from mist. I froze. My breath caught. My hands clenched so tightly they throbbed with pain. Slowly the figure sharpened into clarity, Princess Diana. She wore a tattered white gown, its silk trim faded by time and sorrow. Her golden hair was tousled, and her deep blue eyes sparkled with anguish, yet retained a soft grace like a light that refused to be extinguished. In her hand, she clutched a broken rosary, the beads scattered across the floor, clinking against the stone with a brittle sound. She looked at me, her gaze penetrating, as if it saw every dark corner of my soul. "Oliver Collins," she said, her voice trembling like wind rustling through dead leaves. "You came here carrying admiration for the royal family, but do you want to know the truth behind the crown?" I stood motionless, my fingernails digging deep into my palms, leaving red crescent marks. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst from my chest. "The truth," I whispered, my voice hoarse, eyes locked onto hers. I always thought the monarchy was a symbol of glory." Diana lowered her head, and a single tear slid down her cheek, gleaming like a pearl in the mist. "Glory?" she repeated, her voice bitter. "I once believed that too, but the monarchy is a machine of pride and control. I was cast out for shining too brightly because my light threatened their darkness. She raised her hand, and the mist around us swirled violently, forming vivid images. I saw Diana inside a sealed room, surrounded by shadowy figures in black suits, murmuring among themselves. One man, his face cold and expressionless, spoke, "Princess, stop speaking out or the consequences will be severe." Diana stood tall, her gaze resolute. "I will speak the truth, even if it costs me everything." The scene shifted, a dark road, headlights flashing, the screech of metal, and a scream abruptly cut off. Diana turned to me, her voice trembling. My death was no accident. It was orchestrated to silence me forever. I stumbled back, my breath heavy, sweat trailing down my forehead. "That can't be," I stammered, panic rising in my chest. Why didn't the Queen stop it?" Diana looked at me, the pain in her eyes piercing my heart like a blade. "Elizabeth," she said, her tone soft but sharp. She heard the whispers, knew the plans, but let pride overshadow compassion. She believed the crown mattered more than me, more than truth. The fog trembled, and another figure emerged from the shadows. Queen Elizabeth II, in a tattered grey silk dress, the crown on her head bent and broken, its lone red jewel glinting a drop of blood. Her face was worn, her eyes clouded, but this time they held deep sorrow. She stepped forward, her frail hands trembling, as if she longed to touch Diana but dared not. "Diana," the Queen said, her voice low and choked. "I was wrong. I let pride lead me. I let royal duty strangle my heart. I should have protected you, but I chose the crown." Diana gazed at her, her expression softening, offering a fragile forgiveness. "I know, Elizabeth," she whispered, "but the truth can't stay buried forever. Oliver needs to see it, so he doesn't repeat our mistakes." The Queen turned to me, her eyes heavy, bearing the weight of an entire dynasty. "Oliver," she said, her voice firm but laced with pain, "you idolized me, but I am not the light. The monarchy you worshipped is an illusion built on pride and sacrifice. Let it go before it drags you under." I lowered my head. Tears streamed down, hot against my cheeks, hitting the stone floor and fading like fleeting sparks. The truth pierced through my soul. The royal family I once saw as glorious was a web of power and missteps. Diana paid with her life, the Queen with her soul, and I, in my blindness, nearly followed them. Diana raised her hand, and the fog swelled around her like waves crashing over a shore. "Remember the truth, Oliver," she said, her voice fading like a distant echo, "and seek the real light." She vanished, leaving behind a broken rosary on the floor. The last bead shimmered, then went dark. The Queen remained, her eyes fixed on where Diana had disappeared, as if embracing an unerasable regret. The corridor quaked, cracks split the stone walls. The mist surged like a flood. The Queen turned to me, whispering, "Go, Oliver. Don't let this darkness hold you." She raised her hand, and a stone door appeared, low, narrow silver light spilling through its cracks, like a perilous invitation. The corridor began to collapse. Stones fell. I ran toward the door, my hand pressing against the cold frame. I looked back, but the Queen was gone, her voice lingering behind me, "Seek the real light." I stepped through the door, and the fog swallowed everything behind me. My footsteps had not yet faded when another sound rang out, dry, sharp, and final. Queen Elizabeth II's crown fell to the black stone floor with a hollow clang that echoed like a funeral bell breaking across the realm of souls. The sound rippled through the hellish palace, reverberating between the twisted stone walls, then gradually faded, as if even the space itself had bowed in silence before something irreversible. I stood frozen, my heart ceasing to beat. The air thickened, heavy and cold, as if all of hell was holding its breath. The ghostly figures of monarchs, once drifting aimlessly, suddenly stilled like souls turned to stone, a moment of sacred dread. All motion ceased. Every gaze turned toward one person, the Queen, no longer seated on a throne, no longer cloaked in authority, no longer illuminated by the glory of royalty. Only a lone woman stood before me, silent and stripped bare in spirit. Her silk gown was torn, the seams split like cracks running through the heart of pride. The fabric was soaked in ash and smoke. The once regal makeup had faded into smudged streaks across her pale face. But it was her eyes that chilled me to my bones. They no longer held the gaze of a ruler, but the gaze of someone who had witnessed her own soul descend into the abyss. "Oliver," she spoke. Her voice bore no dignity, no warmth as in the speeches once broadcast to the world. Now her voice trembled with sorrow, despair, and a truth I had never expected to hear. "I am here not because of human slander, not because of the scandals or rumors crafted by the world. I am here for one reason only. I was proud. I believed I had the right to rise above God." I stood speechless, a wave of cold rising within me. Every word was a hammer blow against the illusion I had built around her all my life. She took one step toward me, and I could feel the darkness retreating with every footfall. The dim flames that floated above flickered, as if reacting to a truth finally exposed. "The throne gave me authority," she continued, her voice deepening like a quiet confession whispered in a ruined cathedral. "And I believe that with that authority, I could decide everything. I commanded, I rewarded, I punished, and I remained silent when image had to be preserved. When Diana spoke out, when the public stirred, when the truth was about to emerge, I chose silence. I did not protect her. I did not intervene, because I believed a stable monarchy was worth more than a wounded life." Every word she uttered weighed down on my shoulders. I didn't know why, but my heart ached, as if it were being crushed. I had thought she was perfect. I had believed she was a symbol of wisdom, a moral beacon in a chaotic world. But now she stood here, stripping away everything I had ever idolized. She stopped before me, bowed her head, her hands hanging limp, as if she had lost all strength. "I closed my ears to God's call," she whispered. "I heard him in my soul. He told me to forgive. He reminded me of mercy. But I turned away. I was too busy. Busy holding the throne. Busy guarding my reputation. Busy keeping a hollow crown from falling off my head." A chill ran down my spine. She no longer spoke with pride. There was no longer the tone of someone elevated above mere mortals. Every word now was the cry of a soul unraveling in darkness. Then she lifted her head, and her gaze struck me like a sword, piercing straight into the deepest part of my soul. "And you, Oliver," she said slowly, without accusation, without contempt, only a weary truth being spoken aloud. "You, too, were proud. You didn't wear a crown like I did, but you built a throne in your heart with your own hands, and you placed me upon it. You worshipped me without realizing it." I lowered my head, feeling the blood drain from my face. My heart dropped. There were no more excuses, no more justifications. I had turned her into an idol. I had looked to her as though she were the light at the end of my tunnel, the meaning to a dull life. But the truth was, I had used her image to hide my fear, to avoid confronting the emptiness within me. The Queen did not condemn. She sat down on the cold stone floor, placing her hand gently on the broken crown. She did not try to pick it up. She did not wipe it clean, did not try to place it back on her head. She simply looked at it, like a child gazing at a toy they once cherished, now realizing it's not something worth clinging to at any cost. "I don't resent you for loving me," she said, her voice gentle, like a final lullaby. "I only want you to understand and to warn everyone still alive. Do not worship idols. Do not let fame, appearance, status, or anyone, even kings or queens, take the place of God in your heart. Because when false light blocks out the true light, you and I will both be lost in the same darkness." I looked up at her. There was no perfection left to cling to, no brilliance left to idolize. And yet, in that very moment, she looked more beautiful than ever. Beautiful not because of power or appearance. Beautiful because she was real. Because she was like me, a broken soul, a human being simply longing to be forgiven. My voice trembled. I didn't know if I had the courage to ask, but the words escaped before I could hold them back. I don't know how to return. I don't know where to begin." Her eyes softened, a fragile light flickering in them like a candle in the winter night. "Begin by tearing down the idol," she said. "Clear the throne in your heart. Let God sit where he rightfully belongs. Kneel, Oliver, and tell him that you choose him not out of fear, but because you have seen enough darkness." I looked down at the broken crown at my feet. It no longer sparkled. It held no power. Just a cracked ring of metal, a symbol of the collapse of everything I once admired. And in my heart, a door began to open. Not a door that led me straight into the light, but one that let me know I was not forever trapped. I looked up at her not with the gaze of a worshipper, but with the eyes of a fellow soul wounded in the same battle. And I knew deep within that the door to return had never truly been closed. The stone chamber where I stood with the Queen suddenly shook violently, as if all of hell had been awakened by a power greater than any earthly authority. The stones beneath my feet groaned, and the cold grey walls shrieked as though enduring judgment from heaven. In that moment, a warm wind swept through, not like anything I had ever felt in this place. It was not the breath of darkness. It was something pure, alive, carrying the fragrance of hope. A beam of light pierced through the dome of the palace, slicing open the ink-black sky, shining directly upon where I stood. That light was not blinding in the usual sense. It was warm like a mother's embrace, yet strong like a mountain that cannot be shaken. The Queen stepped back, not out of fear, but as if she understood she was no longer the center. She bowed her head in gratitude and faded into the darkness behind, leaving me alone to face the one who had come to change everything. From within the light, a figure appeared. His form was simple, not clothed in royal robes, not bearing a crown, yet every step he took stirred my soul to its depths. I recognized him even before I heard his voice. My heart raced. I fell to my knees as if my legs were pulled down by the gravity of holiness. I had no words left, only tears, real tears, no longer tears of regret for what was lost, but the breaking of a heart long hardened. He stopped before me. A hand gently touched my shoulder. Not loud, not rushed, but the power of that touch shattered every invisible chain within me. A voice rang out. Unlike any sound in the material world, it entered my soul like sunlight melting through the thickest ice. "Oliver," he said, "I am here to lead you." I bowed my head, my shoulders trembling, my voice choking as I tried to speak. "Lord, I idolize the Queen. The first turned my back on you. I lived as if she were my salvation. I believed in an image instead of the truth. I am not worthy." Each word was like releasing a lifetime of buried shame. He did not rebuke me, nor did he lecture. He simply smiled. A smile no one could ever forget once they had seen it. In that smile, there was not a trace of condemnation, only a depth of understanding so profound, I felt as though he could see every fragment of my soul and still chose to love me. "Oliver," he said gently, "I have seen everything you've ever done, even when you turned away, even when you called the name of an idol instead of mine. I was still there." I looked up, my eyes blurred with tears, staring directly into his face. It wasn't radiant as I had imagined, not distant like the portraits hanging in churches. That face bore the marks of sorrow. There were wounds, there was blood, but no resentment, only love. He placed his hand on my chest. In that moment I felt every void in my heart being filled, not by sweet words or praise, but by presence. A presence so real, so powerful, that nothing could compare. "I love you," he said, "not because you are perfect, but because I chose you, and I have not changed my mind. Let Maine fill your heart where you once let another image take my place." I felt a light flooding into me, not a light from the outside, but from within. Every wound I ever hid, every silent sigh, every unnamed anger, every day I felt not good enough, all of it seemed to be healed. I cannot explain it with words. I just knew I was no longer the Oliver I had been. He had touched the deepest part of me, the part one had never dared to face. I was still kneeling, but I felt lighter, as if the invisible burdens of my entire life had fallen from my shoulders. Jesus did not hold a scepter, but he gave me something more precious than any throne, a mission. He looked at me, eyes full of understanding and love. "Live for me," he said, "not out of fear, but with the light you have just received. You have stepped out of the darkness. Now return to the world and show them the way." I nodded tearfully. No more fear, No more doubt. I didn't know what the journey ahead would look like, but I knew one thing: I would not walk it alone. The light around him began to spread. The palace walls gradually faded, as if melting into golden dust, carried away by the wind. The candles had long gone out, but the entire space lit up with a strange brilliance. I closed my eyes, letting his breath cover me one last time. And then I felt the ground beneath me tremble once more. But this time it was not a collapse, it was a return. A new journey had begun. Not in darkness, but in the true light. The light around me did not disappear abruptly. It faded like a sunset closing a long day, leaving not darkness, but peace. In the final moment I could still feel the warmth of God's hand, as if He were placing me back where I once belonged, but with a new heart. I opened my eyes. The white ceiling of the hospital came into view, with fluorescent lights and the steady beeping of machines. The scent of antiseptic filled my nose, pulling me out of the realm of visions and back into reality. I was still lying in a hospital bed, my head wrapped in bandages, fingertips clipped clenched sensors. Beside me, a young nurse gasped, "He's awake. Doctor, come quickly." I heard footsteps, a door opening, the nurse making a phone call, but everything felt faint, like behind a layer of mist. The clearest thing in my mind at that moment wasn't the physical pain, it was the clarity of the soul. Everything I had seen, heard, and felt, from the distorted palace, the ghost of myself, to the living presence of Jesus, had not vanished like a dream. They became part of me, like bone and marrow, like breath. The doctors came. They asked if I knew who I was, if I remembered what had happened. I nodded and answered softly, "I remember. And I have changed." I stayed in the hospital for several days. During that time I no longer felt fear or the urge to escape. No longer the craving to check royal social media, no longer the desire to cling to books about the British monarchy. I lay still and listened. I didn't just hear the footsteps of nurses or the wheels of carts. I listened within where once had been emptiness, but now there was life. One night, when darkness covered the hospital room, I stood before the mirror. My face was gaunt, perhaps from blood loss and injury, but my eyes no longer looked the same. Gone was the gaze obsessed with idols. Gone was the weariness from chasing things that did not belong to the soul. I saw someone who had been saved not by his own effort, but by grace. When I was discharged from the hospital, I didn't return to my apartment with the same sense of loneliness as before. I returned with a mission. I couldn't keep what I had seen to myself. The visions of hell, of souls bound by pride of the fallen crown, and of the healing light from God, none of it was meant for silence. God brought me back to give a warning. It wasn't just me who needed saving. Many out there are still chasing glittering images without realizing their souls are decaying day by day. I began to write. Not articles about the royal family like before, but vivid journal entries about what I had gone through. I prayed every morning, and in those prayers I didn't ask for more knowledge, success, or health. I only asked for enough courage to tell the truth, whether people believed it or not. I was no longer the man who chased the shadow of the Queen. The first no longer worshipped the teacup with the royal crest as a symbol of power. I understood that no one, not a queen, a president, or a pope, deserves to take the place of God in a person's heart. I am not perfect, but I am saved. And that is enough for me to start over. I found the purpose of my life: to live for God and to bring light to the places once covered in darkness. Though I am an accountant, not famous, not powerful, I have a true story, a story no one can deny, because it bears the mark of the Creator Himself. I once walked into darkness searching for false glory, but by grace I was brought out carrying a light that will never go out. And now I carry that light everywhere I go. I speak about pride. I warn against the idolatry of human beings. I recall the fallen crown, the confession of a queen. But more than anything, I speak of a king who never fails. A king who always loves, always waits, always extends his hand even after I denied him for so many years. I don't know how many people will listen, but I know he gave me a mission, and I will not return to the old path. Because I have seen hell, and I have been touched by heaven. When I stepped through the door of my old apartment, a wave of memories rushed over me. The smell of damp wood, the soft yellow light from the ceiling lamp, the armchair where I used to sit for hours just staring at the portrait of the Queen on the wall. Everything was exactly as I had left it, as if time itself had been waiting for me to return and see it all through new eyes. I stood silently at the doorway for a long while. This space had once been the sanctuary of a blind worshipper. I used to believe that every photo, every book, every object bearing the crown symbol carried within it a fragment of greatness. Now, I saw only a spiritual graveyard where lifeless items had once been exalted above the living God. I did not cry, nor did I feel regret. I took a deep breath, then began to clean. I quietly removed each photo from the wall. The Queen smiled in her coronation gown, stood beside world leaders, sat in her splendid carriage. Each frame was once a moment I had bowed internally, thinking I was learning dignity, when in truth I was worshipping an image. I gathered all the books, memoirs, royal histories, encyclopedias, and placed them in old cardboard boxes. The fine porcelain teacups, which used to make my heart race whenever I acquired or conserved a new one, now sat silently on the table. I touched each item one by one, a strange peace filling my heart. There was no longer attachment, only release. I kept only one item, the cursed teacup, not because I still wanted to own it, but because it served as a reminder. Not a reminder of the Queen, but of the day I fell body and soul and was lifted up by God's mercy. That cup was no longer a symbol of power. It was a memory of redemption. I brought all the books and photographs to the second-hand bookstore where I had once found them. When the clerk asked, "Are you sure you want to sell everything?" I smiled and said, "I don't need them anymore. I've found something greater than everything in here." The act of clearing out wasn't just a physical task. It was a ritual of release. With every item that left the room, I felt a layer of pride, a fragment of illusion, a piece of my old self leave with it. I returned to church, walking into the sanctuary with a humility I had never known before. I was no longer afraid of people discovering my past. I was no longer ashamed to say that I had once worshipped a mortal, because that very past in the hands of God had become a story of redemption. I found comfort in the community. No one mocked me. On the contrary, they listened. They cried with me. They placed their hands on my shoulders. I shared my story from the staircase, the teacup, to the encounter with Christ. And I realized I was not alone. Many others had also lost their way in beautiful but deceptive images. Some had idolized themselves. Others idolized money, fame, perfection. Everyone had a crown that once took the place of God. I began writing. The first book was titled I Met the Queen in Hell. The title sparked doubt in many, but once they read it, they couldn't put it down. Not because it was sensational, but because the truth was told with blood, tears, and repentance. I was invited to conferences, churches, even radio stations. I spoke of the Queen of Diana, of the trial of royal souls, of the archive in hell, and above all, of Jesus Christ, the one who touched me when I had nothing left to offer. I didn't preach theory. I wasn't a pastor or a theologian. I was simply someone who had once been lost and was saved. Each time I shared, I saw something light up in the eyes of the listeners, like the first glimmer of hope after a long storm, like a candle lit in a freezing room. I knew it wasn't my power. It was the light of God spreading through a soul that had once been dark. I kept repeating this one message: no one is too far gone to be saved. I had been in the deepest place of pride. I had worshipped an image so much that I lost my faith, but God still called my name. He didn't let me die in my mistake. He gave me another chance, and I believe if He did that for me, He will do it for you too. The Queen taught me that pride leads to darkness. Diana revealed to me the truth hidden beneath the shell of fame. But it was Christ who gave me eternal light, a light that doesn't fade when the stage lights go out, that doesn't dim when power crumbles, that doesn't vanish when the body returns to dust. I once lived for an image. Now I live to testify to the truth. Today, if you are reading these words, don't see them as a strange story. See them as a wake-up call. Don't wait until everything collapses to realize who is the only one who can lift you up. Let go of your idols, whether it's a person, a feeling, a dream, or even your own self. Surrender your life to Jesus Christ. not because he needs you, but because you cannot truly live without him. Today the light still shines, but one day darkness will return and no one knows who will still have the chance. Let me be a reminder that God never closes the door if you still have the courage to knock. The letter of Oliver Collins has come to a close, but the echoes of his journey still resound, like a warning from the deepest depths of hell. The story of Oliver, a man who once idolized Queen Elizabeth II, has taken us through the dark corridors of pride and sorcery, pride and truth. He began with innocent admiration, worshipping the crown as a symbol of glory. But a fateful accident, a cursed teacup, and terrifying visions revealed a painful truth. Even the Queen, the symbol of power and fame, could not escape the judgment of pride. This story is not just a supernatural vision, it is a mirror for each of us. Oliver once believed the royal family was light, but he realized true light comes only from God. His journey is a reminder that the things we idolize, fame, materialism, power, can all lead us astray, as they did for Oliver and the Queen. Pause and reflect. If Queen Elizabeth II, with her sparkling crown and worldly glory, still had to stand before the judgment seat of God to answer for her pride, then what about us ordinary people? Her status did not save her. Her wealth did not protect her. The memorabilia Oliver clung to, the palaces the Queen ruled, all vanished in the light of truth. So will we. The things we hold, money, reputation, pride, will all be left behind when we face final judgment. But Oliver's story is not just a warning, it is an invitation. Our time is short, and judgment awaits. Yet the light of Jesus Christ still burns bright, ready to lead all who repent. Today is the day to turn from false idols, to surrender your life to the Savior before the door closes forever. Let his story ignite a fire in you, the fire of faith, of humility, of courage to live according to God's will, no matter the cost. We, the ones delivering true testimonies, are committed to bringing light to the darkest places. From remote villages to bustling cities, we want to share the warning and the hope that souls who've touched death have avoided. If you feel the prompting of the Holy Spirit, consider clicking the super thanks button, the heart icon below the video, and blessing us with a gift. Whether small or large, every act of generosity is remembered in the kingdom of God. Your support helps us bring light, warning, and faith to those who are lost, from the most remote villages to the busiest cities. God bless you, today and forever.